Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Raven, and our guest today is Brent Cassity. He is the author of a book called Nightmare Success. It'll be released in January. It can be pre-ordered, and you can learn more on his website, brentcassity.com. He has a new podcast, similar title. It's called Nightmare Success, In and Out, which explores the stories of inmates who were in and now out of prison. So Brent had been CEO of a national company called Forever Enterprises that was recognized in publications including the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and others. HBO did a documentary on their company titled The Young and the Dead, which then spawned the dramatic series 6 Feet Under, a highly acclaimed series that I know I really enjoyed. So before I tell you more about Brent, first off, welcome to the podcast, Brent. How are you?
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
I can see, for those who are watching on YouTube, you can tell Brent's a podcaster. He's got a good podcast set up there.
I've got this board, the microphone, I got it all.
Well, you're coming through loud and clear. But you know, Brent's life has taken some turns. As it says in his bio, Brent had it all and lost it all. Is what happened with Brent and his family's story, and the story of a company called National Prearranged Services. Ended up as an episode on CNBC's American Greed documentary series. So Brent, I appreciate you being so forthcoming and being willing to talk about topics like this. Looking back at your life and your career, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
Well, it's an interesting topic, Mark, because when I thought back on what was my favorite mistake, I really had to dig deep into, and my mistake also, I still struggle with. Well, as you said, we had a company that grew into a national company. To take you back just a little bit, I grew up with a dad, my brother and I, mom, was family of four, and my dad was this bigger than life character. He probably could have made a movie about this man. He's from a small town, valedictorian. Won the state championship, went to school, and then graduated number one in his law school class. He was just that type of guy that people were kind of drawn to. He had that charisma. And he got out of law school, won some big cases, and got into acquiring businesses with doctors. And at a very young age, he had a lot, and we had a lot as a family. And at 14 years old, I thought my life was as normal as anybody else's life. And I found out one night, my dad said, boys, I need to talk to you. He said, I've gotten in trouble with the federal government, with the bank, and I believe I'm going to work out a plea deal. I'm not going to get any prison time, but I'm wanting to move the family to St. Louis, and we're going to get a fresh start. I was like, oh my gosh, this was huge. I mean, everything in my life down in this Southwest Missouri town was exactly how you draw it up in a book. Mm-hmm. And then this. Right. And it didn't make any sense to me, Mark. This is a guy that was what I was trying to be. And as it would turn out, he ended up getting 6 months in prison. And we did move to St. Louis. And I said to myself, when we went to Marion, Illinois, to the prison camp, man, this can never happen to me. This will never happen to me. Mm-hmm. I'll never find myself here. And as it would be, my dad, he got out of prison. He was able to save one company because he'd put it in the family's name, Rhonda, Brent, and Tyler, in a trust. And so he started building that company up. That was the prearranged service company you were talking about, Mark. And, fast forward, one way or the other, different pieces happened, and the family came together and were in that family company. Uh-huh. I liked sales and marketing, and Dad really liked finance. He liked to trade. As the company grew, we had these prearranged funeral contracts, and we funded those by buying our own insurance company, and that was the funding mechanism. So I always looked at it as that was just a necessary evil over there. I like the sales, the marketing, the building, and we're growing, and it's fun. My biggest or favorite mistake is being an owner of a company and having all of this pride that Dad had remade himself and that he was so smart. I never really doubted whatever he said had to be right. Whatever he was doing had to be right. He was just that type of guy. And my mistake is I had people tell me, I think your dad plays a little bit in the gray. He's so smart that he'll take a statute and read things into it that maybe a guy who legislated this out and they signed it maybe didn't think of. So when our world started coming apart, and the issue was our insurance company, that was the one part of the company that I had not made myself familiar with. I had just not even acted like it was anything that I was involved in. So, first of all, that was a mistake. Being an owner, I had responsibilities, and I chose because I didn't like math, didn't like anything to do with insurance, and I just chose lazily that it was okay. I make sense out of that because I'm busy over here. I'm doing all this other stuff. But Marcus, things happen. One day, my dad and our attorney come to me and they said, we're getting a lot of heat with this reinsurance deal, and we're getting a lot of heat from the regulators in all these states. We were in 22 states at the time. They said, Brent, we don't think your dad can be involved in this because he's an ex-felon. And we really think you'd be good to go and talk to these people. I said, wow, okay, well, you're going to have to tell me a little bit about exactly what the mechanisms of this is that works, because I need to be able to speak confidently what I'm talking about. So at that moment, I was thinking about two things. One, can I put the cape on and make this dad so proud that I can save the day? And two, we had a lot of lives that were under our umbrella that I was thinking that we had to go and talk to these people and solve this problem. So I jumped into the fray. By doing that, by doing something that I wasn't really familiar with when I got started, I became the face of what we were doing as a company to the regulators. And as it turned out, we fought for 6 years. It was a long battle. We lost everything pretty much. And at the end of that, we had my dad, myself, our attorney, our investment advisor, our CFO, and my dad's secretary all got sentenced to federal prison. So as I look back on that today, Mark, I really think, and my wife and I had these conversations too, what would I have done? Because I know the first thing I could have done was obviously get more involved in understanding our business, the other side of our business, way before anything happened.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that because it was going to be invading my dad's turf. He never invaded my turf, and I never invaded his. But I had a responsibility to. I was the one that carried the title, not him.
Yeah.
Big mistake. The other one I have trouble with because the thing that actually probably put me in prison was becoming the face of something, running into a burning building. And I struggle with that one because I always thought about the people and their livelihood and their jobs and our responsibility to them. And how could I walk away from that? That one, I'm not sure if that was a mistake or not, but it was just the hand I was dealt.
So, for one, thank you for sharing that. And I guess a couple questions come to mind. Like, first off, going back to when you were a teenager, what was your dad forthcoming about what happened? Did he admit to doing anything wrong, or did he feel like he got caught in a gray area of the law, or did he take ownership of what happened there?
That's a good question. He explained it in a way that of two counts. One was tax fraud, and the other was bank fraud. He explained it that he gave a loan to somebody on the bank board that wasn't allowed. He explained that he appreciated a mobile home park on a busy section in Springfield, Missouri, that he felt like you could appreciate it because of the land value. That's how he explained it to me. As a 14 or 15-year-old kid, that was way above my head. But that's how I always understood it. I always thought that my dad maybe just got too spread too thin. As I got older, my dad was very good at seeing people's what they could bring value to. He was a great cheerleader. He would see potential in somebody or their talent, and he would be able to build them up. He did that with me. He did that with my mom. She built these unbelievable houses, and they go buy these houses, and she'd fix them up, and she'd sell them. And she never really wanted to do it, but she was so talented with it. He talked her into it. She built these beautiful homes all over the world, and some pretty impressive people lived in them. My brother the same way. So he always had a way of saying things over and over that they became true, even if they weren't true. He would believe whatever he said so much that people around him also believed that. And as a son, I had to reflect on that after all of this fell, because I couldn't see such an interesting relationship, because we not just had a father and son relationship. We were, I would say, best friends. We were in business together, and we enjoyed growing the business, even though we were on different sides of the coin, or different sides of the branches of the company. It was a lot of fun. So having to untangle my dad was somewhat of a dismemberment from our relationship, because I had to kind of come to terms with Dad also, because he had the ability to do that with the potential and the talents of people. Sometimes you could possibly feel used. And that was a struggle for me to deal with as a son, because when you have somebody that's godlike, or somebody that you idolize, and it happens to be your dad, he had a lot of great qualities. That's the thing. He died. He served 10 years, so 7.5 years, I think, is the total. And he died 2 months after he got out. So unfortunately, I always thought when he was out, and I had gotten out 2 or 3 years before that, 2.5 years, I guess, before that, I thought, we'll sit down and we'll just talk. We'll just lay it all out there and have this discussion of the deepest things in my mind and how he answers those things. And the weekend I was planning on doing that, he died. So we never had that discussion. So I'm left with dealing with, I don't know if I would be the person I am today without having the dad I've had. But I've learned that trust and loyalty is an important thing in people's lives. But you also have to be, you have to have your eyes open, even if it's your dad.
So, well, and for one, yeah, I did read about his passing. So I am sorry for your loss, especially with some of those questions or that conversation unresolved. Can't imagine how difficult that is on top of everything else. But as a follow-up question about the MPS days, the CNBC show, and leave open question here. I don't know if they got all the facts right, but they portrayed your father as being, and forgive me if this word is indelicate, but mastermind of this plot that turned into fraud charges. So what I hear you saying, though, Brent, is that you were running kind of the other part of the business, didn't know what was happening, weren't really part of the fraud. You were building other parts of the business, and then because then you had that executive title, you get held accountable, whether you were actively participating or just not aware of what was going on.
Well, and I think, Mark, one of the things is that you would have thought that there would have been a lot of red sirens going off, that said, "Hey, wait, well, watch out, what's going on?" There really wasn't. We went 30 years, paid over $500 million in death claims, and always paid them on time. So, from my point of view and my blinders, we were a great company. I was proud of the way that we trained. I was proud of the way that we structured our people to be paid. People did well. And so it was so upsetting to see the company put in that light, because there were so many good people doing good things. And the CNBC American Greed, I unfortunately got to watch that in prison. And that was a strange, I don't even know how to explain that. 435 guys see the week before that my family is going to be featured on American Greed. And wow. It was really, I think the thing that disturbed me, obviously, made my dad out to be a villain and a dark figure. And I thought it was very unfortunate how they made the women in our MPS advantage to be, I think they even talked about it as being like Hooter type women. And Mark, that couldn't have been further from the truth. These were women that were smart, they were engaged to do well and succeed. They were goal setters, and they created these incredible relationships in these different states, and was nothing but proud of them. You hate to see people destroyed like that in a Stacey Leach can make anything sound ominous with his voice, but man, those people who were working, I hated to see that, because that wasn't who they were. On my dad's part, I guess it was an easy play. He's an ex-felon. He started another company, and then we all get indicted. So you don't have to write the script very far from making somebody out to be a villain. But going back to what I said originally, I didn't see a red flag until we found out that we had this arbitration with when I say this arbitration, it was a person we had the reinsurance was the largest reinsurer in the world. So it was like a David and Goliath thing. And Dad and Howard, because we didn't contractually have to renegotiate, they told them they didn't want to. And so when it became a struggle, they canceled all the policies. And that started a nuclear war. And that's, whenever you have smoke in the industry that we were in, there's always assumed to be a fire. And that hit our capital and surplus, $8 to $9 million of fighting with a gigantic company. And it was a mess. In the end, all of those allegations of fraud were dismissed on the reinsurer side, because there was an email that came up years after, but still as the arbitration was going on, that there's no fraud here. We just made a bad mistake. And we should have known our contract better than trying to just make a deal. That went to the board, but it didn't matter, Mark, after that, because we had already lost the battle. We were in the thick of all the regulators. And by that time, the slippery slope, we were already under the avalanche. So there's no feeling like that. When you start losing a company and then you start getting requests from regulatory people, there's not enough hours in the day. And there were several times that I thought that we were going to make it. I thought I had created a decent relationship with the insurance commissioner down in Texas, and another person got involved and decided they wanted to go another way. And it was just, by the time it was all over, Mark, I was just dead tired, just dead tired. And I knew I was going to prison. And it was just like, man, I guess I need to get started so I can get it over. That's how I felt.
And you served how long at Leavenworth? And that sounds like a place like, I mean, I don't know much about prisons, like violent offenders are there in Leavenworth? That's a heavy security prison, right?
It's a place that a lot of people know. So there's the USP, United States Penitentiary, and then there's the Leavenworth camp. So when you go in, you are processed into the USP, which is very intimidating. I don't know, Mark, if you've ever seen Shawshank, but it's got that look.
Yeah.
You know, it's built in 1879. It's an old place. And you end up down in this basement, and the first thing you realize is you don't know anything, and you're not going to know anything because they don't want you to know anything. And then you start wondering, then what's next? And you sit in this cell for a long time when you voluntarily surrender that day. And it's a feeling like no other feeling that I will ever experience, because you almost feel like your freedom is shedding off of you when you're walking through that first gate and it closes, and you walk through the second gate and it closes, and that guy comes to get you, and you walk into that sidewalk into the basement of that prison. It's just so humbling.
And so that camp, was that separate from the most violent of the prisoners?
Yeah, the camp. Interestingly, the camp didn't look like a normal camp, because back in, I think, 1990, they had set it up to be a low. So there's a camp, there's low, there's mediums, and there's maximums. So it's all built on your custody level and the number of years you're serving and so on. But the camp was built like a low. So it had the scary fences with the barbed wire, the double fences with the rolled barbed wire. So it was intimidating for somebody that you wanted to invite up to have a visit, because it looked scary. But the place that was the most scary was up on the hill, and that was the USP. So if you had a job, some jobs allowed you to walk outside those fences and be outside of that small campus of the camp. And I was fortunate enough to work in the food warehouse. It was about a mile away that I would walk to, and we served, I guess it was 2,100 people. So we had a lot of food. And but it was a good job. I got to learn, I got to get forklift certified. I was the clerk of the warehouse. And my strategy when I went was, I'm not going to stop being me. I've got to figure out what would I do on the outside. I would set goals. I would have a plan, and most of it's to stay busy so that I don't fall into a rut that I can't get out of. So that my strategy going to prison was trying to continue to be me in some form or fashion, even though I was in such an unfamiliar environment.
And so coming out, and before I ask a question, you were there how long?
So I got 60 months, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get into the program that allowed me a year off.
Okay.
It was a 9-month program. It was called Residential Drug Alcohol Program, I believe. Sometimes I have trouble remembering the acronym. But when I was doing my pre-sentence report, the guy that was doing my pre-sentencing report for the judge, he asked me, he said, "Brent, do you drink?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you under a lot of stress?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you drinking to relieve your stress daily?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Well," he said, "I think I'm going to put in your pre-sentence report to recommend that you take this program." And he said, "It's not guaranteed that you'll get in, but if we put in the pre-sentence report, it's your responsibility when you get there to go and talk to Dr. Wells and be interviewed to possibly be able to get into the. So to me, that was a gift from the guy that I was talking to for the pre-sentencing report. And I was lucky enough to get into it. It was an interesting program, different than any other program in prison, because the other stuff is just kind of all a waste of time and babysitting. But there was some reasons why the RDEP program was in place. It was mostly set out to try to lower the recidivism rate of prisoners. Sure. I don't know if anybody on this podcast would know, but with the numbers are so bad in recidivism. There's 2/3 that go back in 3 years and 3/4 that go back in 5. So, and there's reasons for that. A lot of people that don't know the whole piece of that story, inmates, when they were released, it's almost like the last of its breed that you can legally discriminate against. You go for a job, you have to check that box. If you go to try to live somewhere, you have to check that box. If you want to try to get credit or get a car, you have to check that box. And for those 3 things, those are kind of the 3 things that get you back into society.
Right.
And
right.
I'm hoping that something's tweaked as time goes on that, because I think there's a lot of men out there, nonviolent offenders. I'm not talking about the people that are trying to hurt people. I'm just talking about the nonviolent offenders. Those people, there needs to be a better path for them to get back to being a productive citizen in the United States once they get out. I hate to see that uneven path for people as they get out, because you really have to find somebody that will believe in you and give you the opportunity. And there has to almost be a relationship in there built in before that opportunity exists.
Yeah. I mean, I did hear something not long ago on NPR where, there was one person, there are many people who are advocating for trying to change some of the laws that require disclosure of, past conviction or felony conviction. And, as trying to, if people have served their time and quote unquote paid their debt to society, then you've got to let somebody try to build a life.
Yeah, just the opportunity. There's a lot. I saw the other day that here in St. Louis, they're having a heck of a time getting people hired, and they did a job fair for ex-felons, and it was heavily attended. And these people were so anxious to have the opportunity to actually be interviewed, to be taken seriously for a job opportunity. And again, I don't want to, and there's, for the violent criminal that has hurt people, that's a different type of person as a person who's for whatever mistake they made, there probably should be a different path for them.
Yeah. So, Brent, I know you in different ways try to share, the lessons, let others learn from your experiences, and I appreciate that. Hopefully, everybody listening says, well, I don't want to go to prison myself. I don't want to learn Brent's 5 tips for how to survive in prison, but I appreciate that you have some tips of some of those survival lessons that you think people could use in everyday life. Can you share at least some of that with us? Sure.
I mean, I think the first one is, and these things that I talk about on the tips are really more, you don't have to go to prison, but I think they can be helpful in general. Like when I first got to prison, the first thing that I needed to do was I needed to humble myself, look around, and ask for advice. Who was getting it right? Who was making it work for themselves? And I think that can be used in everyday life. You get a new job or you get into a new situation. Humble yourself to ask for advice, because surprisingly, a lot of people will give you advice. In my world that I was in business, as a young 20-something and in my 30s, I would read something in an article or something, and I would just call them. And surprisingly, they would pick up the phone and we'd have a conversation. And I was able to actually take those pieces and implement them into our business. So number one is that. 2 is that whether you're in prison or you're not in prison, for those who haven't seen Shawshank Redemption, there was a scene in there that affects me because Andy Dufresne is a innocent man in prison, and he chips through a wall for 19 years in his cell, and every day he cuts holes in his pockets and he lets that wall out into the yard, and that's his reward for sticking to what he's doing. But in his mind, he has this picture of Zihuatanejo. And Zihuatanejo is a place down in Mexico, and he has it pictured so vividly in his mind. It's the bluest of the blue, the waters. He has this boat in his mind of, he's got to fix up this old boat and take people out on fishing expeditions. He's going to take this old hotel and have people come and experience this beautiful place. He has all this in you can see it when he talks about it, and you can see his eyes light up. I think that everybody always needs to have a Zihuatanejo, their feeling of what gets you that feeling and that gets you pumped, and then have a plan that brings you to it. His plan was I'm going to knock through this wall and then his reward was letting it out into the yard. You need to do that where you get yourself every day. Find something that you can reward yourself with.
Yeah.
The other one is that, mistakes happen. They don't define you, but they definitely make you wiser. So use it. Use those mistakes not as failures, and not as something that defines you, but just use it, because the one thing you don't want to happen with a mistake is to do it again.
Right.
Nothing wrong with making a mistake. Just don't duplicate it. And definitely don't do it right after you made it. Just use it.
Right.
The other one is that you want to take it one day at a time. Unfair things happen, and you want to try to win the day the best you can. Mm-hmm. For me, I wrote into a calendar every night before I went to bed, and I knew if I had a bad day, I was going to write that in the calendar, but I told myself I'm not going to let myself have another bad day. I'm going to have to find a way tomorrow to win the day. So if unfair things happen, don't let that stop you from still trying to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And the last one is that you have to continue, regardless of the circumstances, where you are, what you do, still be you. Don't lose you. Because if you do, and you get into the wrong rut, the wrong routine, you will actually, you will lose you. You will fall into a, what I call institutionalized, where you can see it, where you want to be, but you can't get out of it because you're afraid of it.
Yeah.
And I think those 5 things, if people do those 5 things and live by those 5 things, you can almost apply them to anything in life. But it certainly helped me get through prison, because whenever I felt like I was kind of rocky, it steadied me. I looked at it. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing is that, if you have a plan, you have a goal, don't shove it in the drawer and say, okay, I did that. And then pull something out a year later and say, oh, it's time to do my goals again. No, evolve with them. Let them breathe. As you change, let them change. But they're something you need to keep in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like, to that 5th point of still be you. I mean, I imagine the worst outcome of somebody spending time in prison is anger or depression and or falling in with the wrong people, and that could really set things in a bad direction for the rest of your life, as opposed to Brent. I mean, what are some of your reflections now, in your time out of prison and staying yourself and rebuilding?
It's a great question, because going into prison, it takes probably 6 months to a year to set yourself up in an environment to where you can live a certain way, know that you're going to survive a certain way, it sounds terrible, but to get to a point where you're comfortable living, even in prison. And that does happen. strangely enough, even though that any given time your world can change by a lockdown or anything else that happens, you learn to find a way to survive. My point is that I always think if you're feeling like a victim, flip the script. Flip the script and make yourself a survivor. That gives you strength. Anytime you're being a victim, it weakens you and makes you small. So my thing is that I needed to be a survivor in prison. I made a mistake. I didn't pay attention to what I should have been paying attention to. And so I was going to suck it up and make this work. So I think, that was important for me going in. Strange thing, Mark, coming out, and it's a very weird phenomenon. You get 6 months to freedom, and your mind starts spinning. And I've talked to a lot of different guys because I interview them on my podcast, and we all have kind of the same phenomenon. The things that you didn't think about are all in front of you now, and the things that make you worried are, okay, time actually stopped for me. It really stops in prison. Everything else goes on. And you stop the clock in prison. So you know that you're moving out into a world that didn't stop while you were in. For me, I had a fantastic wife, Julie, who came every weekend to see me. That also enabled me to stay plugged into my girls who were in college at the time. And so I was one of the lucky ones, probably one of the 30 guys out of the 435 guys that got visits. To me, that helped me stay plugged in, like to straddle the outside world.
Yeah.
But I still knew, even though we were a tough, strong, flexed our muscles family, that I was coming out into a world that they had gotten used to living without me. Simple things. Julie I'd always paid the bills. Now she's paid the bills for 3 years. Me being a dad, they had done all these moves in college and stuff that I used to do. And so I had to get back into society and kind of look at, okay, I'm observing as I was when I went into prison. What is going on out here? I want to fit in correctly. And I don't want them to think I'm a prison creature because I've been in prison. And that's something you worry about. Like people look at you, oh, wow, you were in prison? Huh. You look like normal, but I don't know, maybe he's not. So
they're looking for prison tattoos or other, like, what would the physical evidence be? Right?
Exactly. So you have all these things spinning in your head of how can I step back in? And all that's going on as you get out. And everybody's looking at you as, Brent, aren't you so excited? Yes, I am. I am so excited not to be in prison. But I feel really uneasy and unsteady about what I'm doing, getting back into my world, because it seems stranger to me. Yeah. So it took me probably 6 months to a year to really feel like I was back. And, 7 weeks of it, as I went to an awful place, a halfway house that was in the worst hellhole of St. Louis, where all the bad stuff happens. Of course, that's where the halfway house was. And so I lived in that environment, which about 100, 150 guys that from maximum to minimum. And that was probably a worse environment than prison.
Wow.
Just because there was real danger on the outside. The danger that I had at prison was known danger. The danger that we had living there was anything could happen, and it could happen in a bad way. You could actually get killed. So that was a tough way to come out. There's all kinds of reasons why they do certain things in the federal system or the halfway house system, but they need to rethink that one. It's not the best thing for people. But anyway, to answer your question, Mark, the getting out is not as simple as it sounds. It is truly something that you have to steady yourself with. You have to be in touch with yourself. You have to give yourself a little bit of breathing room to make it work. And I know that sounds really strange. Like, well, Brent, that's, you got out of prison, so you're super excited. Absolutely. But trying to get back into society, being gone for 3 years, getting back with the friends, and The other thing is I'm one that really wants to stand out in front of what happened to me. I don't like walking into a room and saying, I can't, did he go to prison? I think he went to prison. I would rather people just know I went to prison, and I'd rather them just ask me about it.
Yeah.
And I don't have anything to hide about the situation. I just want to live normally. And I love freedom, love family. And, you know, you really get, interestingly enough, one of those strange things, Mark, that happens when you get sentenced, you have this unique thing that happens where all these people write letters on your behalf.
Mm.
As an adult, unless you die and people get up and talk at your funeral,
You don't.
you don't really do that.
Right.
I got so much from that, from all these different people that I'd known throughout my years and different life experiences. And I took those letters with me to prison. On bad days, I would get those out and say, no, I'm still plugged. I've got meaning. Things can happen. But I can also admit that when I decided that I was going to plea that night, that I considered suicide. So, you know, to me, that, and I probably I shouldn't just gloss over that. I felt like it was the first time in my life that I had really gone down to such a dark place. And I'm a half full, you know, guy. I'm an optimistic guy. That's just the way I'm wired. But that night I felt like the kids were going to be taken care of. Julie was going to be taken care of. I was going to plea. This is going to be over. I would just rather everybody have a clean slate. I don't want to be a stain on the rest of their lives, knowing that I'm going to be a convicted felon. I'm not even sure if I can live it as a convicted felon. And so I got in my car after I wrote a letter first, and I got in my car in the garage, and my kids and wife were out of town. I was going to see them the next day. I was either going to run into a tree or just let the car run in the garage. And thank God I didn't pass out, but something, Mark, struck me like a lightning bolt. It was like, what in the world are you doing, Brent? You aren't this guy. If I would do this, it would be the weakest way that I could ever look to my family, to my kids, to my wife. And at that moment, it was that moment that I said, whatever happens to me here on out, I'm a survivor. I'm going to take this experience as it comes to me, and I'm going to try to use it. And to my point of where I'm at now in my life, I've been out about 5 years, and that's why I've written the book. I have this experience, and it's been such a roller coaster of a great life. I mean, even though I've gone to prison, I have a great family and a great wife, and I've experienced some wonderful things in life, and I've experienced some really bad things. But as I take it all, I get a lot out of if my story can help anybody else. And that was the reason for the book. It makes me feel good if that can be used in a way that could actually help someone who's stuck or feels like a second chance isn't possible. They're not seeking their potential because they're afraid. And that's kind of the idea of the podcast In and Out is we're talking to guys that were inmates. They're out now. We're talking about life before prison, life in prison, life out of prison. And in those stories, I think there's little nuggets of techniques, strategies of how do you get through it? When your worst fear becomes your reality, how do you get through it?
So again, the book, the title of the book is Nightmare Success by Brent Cassity. And as he just said, the podcast, Nightmare Success In and Out. You can find that whatever app or directory you're using to listen to us right now. Go and check that out. One other thing I was curious about, Brent, you talk about being out, and if people wonder, well, I recognize that name, and was he in prison? You're back there in Missouri. Some people might, flee and go to a different place. We're like, well, maybe nobody knows the name here. Like there was a lot covered in the St. Louis media. Do you ever fear, or do you run across people who recognize the name, or they're angry that they faced some sort of loss, or were upset about your dad and the company?
Well, I think that's always going to be out there. And It's a great question, Mark, because when I was a 14-year-old teenager, my dad's choice was to move away. And
That's
I
right.
didn't like that when I was a kid because I had all my friends there and I felt secure. That was my security blanket. And we moved away from all that. As I get older, we've had some really good friends who have stuck by us. And, the guy I work for, Jose, has stuck by me. And that strangely is a security blanket. If I moved away, all I would be is a Google person. Whereas here, there are people who've known me, they've grown up with me, they went to high school with me, maybe
They
worked
wrote
with me.
letters.
Yeah. And so I'm, it's a great question because it seems like the easy thing to do is move to where you're anonymous. And it might be. I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's just that I do know now that I do have these core of people who have been with me all the way throughout. I also know that there always will be haters because there was one strong narrative that was told, and it was told for a long time. And there's no way for me to get away from any of that. And I understand too that probably the thing that stays with me hardest and most is the people who worked for us that were loyal, that had families and they lost their jobs. I will never, ever be able to wipe that from my brain when I go to sleep at night, when I wake up. That's just something I live with. But it's a good question, Mark, and I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. It feels like I didn't like it when I was a kid, and I feel more of a security blanket where I'm at in St. Louis. Not saying I wouldn't move. In my Zihuatanejo, I'd like to be down on Table Rock Lake in a nice house and the kids there for Thanksgiving and Christmas and a boat to go out on and listen to the Eagles. So I'm not saying I'm tied to St. Louis, but it's not a bad place for me to be at this moment.
And I was asking the question out of curiosity, not judgment of what you did or haven't done in terms of moving. So
no, it's actually a real question because my wife and I talked about it.
Yeah. But back to your 5 tips before we wrap up. I was going to share with you, and what you said, especially around the idea of mistakes, is so in line with what we always talk about here on My Favorite Mistake. Whether the mistakes are really big and life changing, or just the thing that you wish you could go back and do differently. Maybe I'll send you one of these. I have this coffee mug. You see
I'd love that,
logo.
Mark.
You see my logo, but on this other side, thanks to my friend Karen Ross, who was my guest on episode 3, and us talking about these mistakes, I have some reminders here that I read to myself, even as I'm doing an interview. And
I love it.
I make mistakes, but just to read it, and you can't see it, and people who are just listening, I've mentioned this a couple times. But be kind to yourself. 2, nobody is perfect. 3, we all make mistakes.
Yep.
And then 4, the important thing is continuing to learn from our mistakes. So that's what we're trying to do here, is remind people of that.
To me, that's what you're doing, Mark, with this podcast is it's a good thing. People need to understand that and give themselves a break and move forward. Just step, take action, just step.
Well, thank you for taking the step of coming on here, Brent. And again, I do want to mention BrentCassity.com. It's Cassity with a T.
Yeah, we spell it wrong.
in at least Midwestern way of saying, we would say Cassity and Cassity the same way. It would sound like Cassidy, but BrentCassity.com. The book is Nightmare Success. The podcast is Nightmare Success In and Out. So Brent, thank you for sharing your story and your reflections, and really appreciate you being a guest here today.
Mark, I appreciate it. And I much appreciate being a guest of yours.